All right, here we go. Welcome everyone to a discussion of Tehanu, the fourth book in. Gotta heave this huge tome up here, and Bill has his as well. Yes. So
The
welcome
brick.
everybody. This is
Okay.
okay. Glenn's got his Kindle there. Smart man. Smart man. But anyway, this is the fourth of the Earthsea books that we are discussing here today. And if you missed the earlier discussions that Bill and Glenn and I had together on A Wizard of Earthsea, book 1, and The Tombs of Atuan, book 2, and The Farthest Shore, book 3 of the Earthsea series, then you can find those discussions on Glenn and Bill's channel. It's called Non-Terrestrial Half-Life. And I'll have a link to that. And those were wonderful discussions. I also have included them, links to them in my own playlist, my Guin playlist. So you can find it there as well. So yeah, so welcome back to Glenn and Bill. Bill, how are you doing?
I'm doing really good. Thank you.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. And Glenn, how about yourself?
Doing great. We've been looking forward to this for a while. This is going to be fun.
Here. Same here. Yep. And we are joined by, I am so happy because we were sort of joking a little, but not really joking before we started recording. And I was saying to Anita, thank goodness you're here. We three old white guys are talking about the most feminists of Le Guin's Earthsea books. These three old white dudes. So Anita, thank you for saving us and just for being here. We're very happy to have you here and to add your perspective to this assessment of this incredible book. So thank you for being here, Anita.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor actually. I'm Tehanu. I read, I think December. It's been almost 5 months and it made a profound impact. I have been meaning to talk about it from that time. I have been, meaning to send you a message from that time. It took me this long actually to finally talk to you.
Well, the timing worked out well because now Glenn and Bill and I are ready to talk about it. So it's great to.
I did not know you're on this book actually. I was meaning to ask you, okay, when will you finish your read so that we can have the discussion? I did not know you just finished this book at all.
That worked out well. That worked out well. So I would like us to start with a non-spoiler. I'd like to give each of you a chance to give your general assessment of Tehanu and where you see it fitting among the first three, I guess, among the first four, rather, of the Earthsea books. How would you compare it to the others? We're not going to spoil anything at all. So if you haven't read any of the Earthsea books yet, you're fine to stick around. And we'll give you a warning when we are going to talk spoilers. And when we do start with the spoilers, it could be for the first three books as well as Tehanu, the fourth book. We won't spoil anything past Tehanu, however, because there are the short stories. And then there's the other book, the last one, The Other Wind, I believe it's called. So let us start with, how about Anita, why don't you start us off and give us your non-spoiler assessment of Tehanu, your general impressions and that sort of thing.
Okay. From the beginning, actually, I am a character-driven reader. So when I started Earthsea, it wasn't mostly about characters, it's about themes. So it surprised me how much Guin made me fall in love with those themes. I'm not at all a theme-driven reader, actually. If they're there, I was like, okay, but I don't look for it, any themes in a book. But Guin completely changed my perspective. The way she writes her story around those themes, and each and every book have a couple of themes different, and she wove her story around those themes. First book talked about equilibrium and the balance in the nature and in this earthy world, and second book is about freedom and free will and choice. And this book, Tehanu, is completely about trauma, gender, and power. And she has done a fantastic job. I mean, I have read many books, even watched different media like the shows and movies who dealt with this theme, but this is the perfect book actually, which dealt with trauma beautifully done. Definitely one of my favorite books ever.
Yeah, that's really well said. I have to agree with you
Great.
that it really does deal with trauma head on in a way that you rarely see, and so beautifully at the same time. Just Le Guin has not only just a beautiful way of words, but you're right. I think she is a theme first kind of author. And the characters, you could even say, maybe are, especially in the first book, Wizard of Earthsea, are kind of flat, really, which is not what most readers are looking for these days. But somehow there's a magic to her words for me that just I find absolutely spellbinding. But so, Bill, how about you? What are your non-spoiler thoughts? Your how would you compare this to the first three books?
Honestly, this is my favorite. I seem to
Wow.
say that every time we go on. That book is my favorite, but I've never read this one. The other three were rereads for me from when I was a child, but this is my first time reading this, and I got to tell you, the tonal shift was surprising because there is a tonal shift, but
Yeah.
the themes are very much there, which her prose as usual is just magnificently beautiful. I have a notebook just full of quotes because I mean it's just so beautifully written. Her exploration of I think an underused topic, the women of Earthsea. We never really get their POV. What's going on with them was beautiful. So I honestly my favorite so far.
Marvelous, marvelous. Wow, that's high praise, and I can see why, though. And then when we get into the specifics, I'm sure you'll be able to give us some more details about why it's your favorite. But I have some suspicions already. So excellent, Glenn. What about you? What's your assessment, non-spoiler, of Tehanu?
Well, it's not my favorite. That still goes to Tombs of Atuan. I think it might actually be the best written of the four. Just looking at it from a more objective point of view, I like it in that aspect more than I liked the other three. But Tombs of Atuan is still my favorite, I think, overall, story-wise. But the first thing I noticed with this book is it broke my heart. It emotionally devastated me, and I loved it. I loved every second of it, which I don't know what that says about me, but I must just like suffering through, bad things happening to characters, and it was definitely worth the read. I'm glad we did this one. I'm glad we didn't just stop at the farthest shore. I've been meaning to read this since I first knew it came out back in the early '90s.
Yeah, you're so right, Glenn. And Bill also mentioned the tonal difference. And this is definitely, I would say, darker. This is a more melancholy. And there was plenty of melancholy in The Farthest Shore and even
Right.
in Tombs of Ash. But this one is, I think, and somehow it is still beautiful at the same time. But she really does look at not just suffering, but the trauma that people inflict on each other. And there are some really bad things that happen in this world, in the real world. And somehow without, it's typical of these books. I think we can all agree that the Earthsea books, for fantasy, there's not much violence in these books. Usually there's one or two incidents of violence that really seem to stick out because of the lack of violence elsewhere, and they are so impactful. And I though it had been many, many years since I read the Earthsea books, I remembered these specific events. Unlike, let's say, you read a much bigger series with lots of epic battles, you don't tend to remember the details of what happens to who exactly so much. But in these books, there's somehow this impact that she has on me, at least, and the incidents really stick with me. They're very human. They're very personal. They're small scale. There are no epic battles in Earthsea, right? Although the violence is very small scale and very personal, and somehow just so much more impactful. That's just a lot maybe attributed to her talent as a writer.
And I think that has a lot to do with why the characters feel so real, is because it's not like the Wheel of Time or Song of Ice and Fire, just this big, massive scale.
Right.
You know, it's boiled down. It's I saw your reviews earlier on your channel. I was wondering if you're still going. So one thing I noticed is early on, I realized this is a fantasy world, unlike most fantasy worlds, that I would actually like to visit. You know, if that was such a thing as being possible to actually go and physically visit the world. I tend more towards the science fiction on the worlds I'd like to go to because, you know, I like antibiotics and sanitation. But this is I don't want to say peaceful world, although the books are more peaceful. There just hasn't been that much, as you pointed out, that much violence. But just because there's not as much violence doesn't mean it's any more of a just and light world. It's rather dark at times in a lot of aspects. And this book really struck that home for me, I think. Yeah,
I
some
think
of the
for me,
aspects that she discusses.
the aspect of violence, as an author, she wields it like a scalpel as opposed to a sledgehammer. And that is a huge difference because especially in today's sort of grimdark world, we get, you know, a whole bunch of violence and it's pretty graphic. The way it's small scale, and when it is in there, it like I said, it's very finely done. It's
Yeah.
not blunt where it hits you with a hammer, but you feel it more because it is so smoothly done.
Yeah.
So I definitely feel like she definitely, as a writer, her violence was used like a scalpel more than the hammer. That just stuck in my mind.
It's a good metaphor.
Yeah, in first three books, it was like, a battle between good and evil, and it's one person's ambition mostly. One person trying to, you know, want to lead the world, wants to get that power. But this book actually, she shows the dark side of humanity, where the individual person wants to have that power over other person.
Yeah.
That exploration was beautifully done.
Another great thing about Tehanu is the age range of the characters. We have some aging characters in here, and the some young characters as well. And I love how she incorporates themes of aging and feeling one's fragility and one's mortality. And mortality has come up in every single Earthsea in a very big way. You had it in A Wizard of Earthsea, most certainly. It is, for me, A Wizard of Earthsea is a book about acceptance of mortality in many ways. And then you have it most certainly in Tombs of Atuan, even more directly in The Farthest Shore. It's very much an exploration of our denial of mortality, and in denying death, we deny life. So it's a really beautiful philosophical book in many ways. But here it feels very human. It feels, this exploration of mortality feels very human, very earthy. You have these aging characters who are less capable for whatever reasons. We won't say, in particular cases why, but some of it has to do with just age. And we see characters who die as well. And that's part of this whole cycle we're in. And this is the beautiful philosophy underlying Earthsea, I think, is very Taoist in many ways. It's certainly very Eastern, the whole yin and yang business, but, death being part of life and life being part of death, and them being interconnected and very much dependent on one another. So it's just a lot of beauty and philosophy in these books, I think, that we can celebrate. But any other non-spoiler thoughts before we dive into spoilers?
I like that we see, you brought up age range. We see a demographic that I can't think of many times I've seen in fantasy or science fiction, which is most of what I've read, and that's the older woman, middle age or older. I mean, the only one I can think of off the top of my head is the nursemaid in The Wheel of Time, Linny. Who's, we see her a lot, but she's not like an important character to the story. Older women tend to be ignored in science fiction and fantasy, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I'm glad she did that.
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah. So yeah, all right. Any other non-spoiler thoughts for the good of the order?
Just that, if you love words and how they can be put together beautifully and constructed, and you read for prose, please read Earthsea, please. I'm telling you. Best purchase I ever made was this book. It's now my comfort read. Just the
Yeah.
prose alone, the way it flows, is just beautifully done. So if that's your thing, we got you covered. Earthsea, you're good.
Also, to add to Bill's point, if you're not connected with any characters in the first book, please stay with it. You know, that will definitely improve from the second book. We see them more, and we see different sides of them, and that connection actually eventually comes. So please stay with it. That characters and world building actually is amazing from the second book. So
Yeah.
please stay with it. Please give it one more chance.
Great point, because I do hear from a lot of folks who are more accustomed to modern fantasy, and they are character readers. They call themselves character readers, and they're like, "What is this? It feels like a folktale or something." And what happens is these characters do grow on you. They really grow on you, I think, and there is a certain beauty to them, and their lifelong stories in some cases. So it's beautifully done. All right, well, I think that is a good effort at a non-spoiler assessment of Tehanu. I think now we shall wander into spoilers. So this is your warning. If you have not read Tehanu and the first 3 Earthsea books, we're going to be raising points, specific plot points from them, and talking about characters, etc., etc. So this is your moment. Unless you are spoiler tolerant, you'll probably want to go off and buy this book.
Yes.
So
Getting your workout, Philip?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you really could. That is quite a tome. So all right. Well, let's begin where the story begins, which it pretty much leaves right off. We left the farthest shore, and actually, Tehanu starts a little bit earlier when we're with Tenar, or what's her name?
Goha.
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 Yeah, so she's Goha now, and she's left behind her name Tenar. But then we catch up when Ged shows up on the Telesin. Callison there. Ged shows up, and we're pretty much these two. It's interesting because Le Guin waited a lot of years to write this, but it picks up the thread right where the farthest shore left off. So what are your thoughts? Let's talk about Tenar, since she is the protagonist of this story. She's the main character. She's the POV character for the duration, really. What are your thoughts on her as she developed? Were you surprised by her becoming going from the Eden one to having this opportunity to learn magic from Ogian, to actually walking away from that and decide, no, I want to have this normal life, normal in air quotes. I want to have this life of being, a wife and a mother and living on a farm and all of that. So what do you guys make of that? Anyone want to go first? Talking about Bill?
I was empathetic towards it because she has seen the danger of power and what it can do from multiple angles. So I get her reluctance and going, you know what? I just kind of want to be normal. I get it. I mean, some people, that is not striving for power. She had it to a degree. She had it, and it did not make her any happier. So I understand her wanting to give a shot at a normal life. So I was kind of proud of her, honestly.
Interesting.
I was glad to meet Goha as opposed to Tenar.
Yeah.
It kind of made me happy. So
Goha had her she had a life, and it was rich and rewarding in many ways, and disappointing in some ways too, perhaps you might say. And her husband died early, her son didn't really turn out that great. And he's lacking in the empathy department, perhaps a bit there.
Spark
Maybe
is not nice.
little signs that Spark might be learning. He does teach Ged how to tie a knot, so but for the most part, yeah, I'm happy for Tenar. What about you, you other two? What about you, Glenn? What did you think of Tenar's life?
I was surprised at first. It's not what I was expecting. I don't know why I was expecting anything different given the first 3 books, but it made sense after I started reading it. And it really made me happy because I'm picky about the characters the female characters that I rank the highest among my favorite characters. I try to avoid characters that are too reliant on being the badass warrior woman or the super powerful magic user, because most in the genre I read, most of the female characters that are ranked highest, people's favorite, are either warriors or have magic, and that's not who she is. I mean, it seems like she has power, but that's not what's defining her as a character. It's like how one of my all-time favorite characters, I don't know if you've read Jenny Wirtz and Raymond Feist's Empire trilogy, Mara of the Acoma.
Yeah.
By far, for the longest time, she's been at the top of my list for female characters. And I think she might be challenged for the first time in decades, so
Wow.
I've loved that character for a long time. And now Tanar's up there because I don't have to say she's another Buffy the Vampire Slayer or another Nynaeve Elmira. She's not defined on exceptionality.
Yeah. So there's something very real about her. There's something that she definitely feels like someone I could know, and talk to and all of that. Anita, what are your
someone
thoughts?
I have known.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. What are your thoughts, Anita, on Tenar/Goha?
It was very bold decision by Le Guin, actually. She not only made a female character as the main lead, because until now we have seen Ged as the main character, but in this book the tone totally shifted and she became the main character. And as Glenn said, she's not like warrior fighting all that. She chose that laid back life and she never regrets it. That's what I liked about it. She never misses that old life. She chose that life and she stuck with it. And once that, as you said, her husband died and her daughter is married and her son went to find his own adventures, and she doesn't sit back and cry or relax. She takes up on this girl and start different adventure, new adventure. That part actually, it I totally give credit to Le Guin here, because the way she handled it made Tenar who she is now. I mean, if it was someone else, actually, I could see it will be easily boring. Actually, Le Guin did an excellent job here.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. And of course, one thing that prevents her from feeling lonely, you could say, is that she does gain a purpose. And as you said, Anita, her husband's passed away. Her daughter is married and has her own household. Her son has gone off to be a sailor / semi-pirate, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then this little person comes into her life, someone who has been deeply traumatized. And this is, by the way, we should have warned people earlier, but anyone who's read the book knows that nothing on page, but you do realize that Theru not only has been burned on a significant portion of her body, one of her arms is pretty much, it's gone, really. I mean, it's just been burnt, and then half of her face, one eye has been burned away. But there are strong implications that she was molested and raped before that, that the 2 men that were abusing her mother were also abusing her, and that she was an object to them of exploitation. And this is where you get where the incredible cruelty that humanity is capable of and the sense of, particularly in a patriarchy, I think, where men are taught to be real men, they have to have power, and to have power is to have mastery over others. And it's a sick form of asserting one's power to do horrible things to other people, to say, yes, I can do this to you because I'm more powerful. It's a horrible and pathetic thing, but that we see Theru has been deeply traumatized. And I wonder about your thoughts on why Goha slash Tenar decides to take in this child the way she does. Does she see a reflection of herself as a girl who was taken from her family and somewhat traumatized by being the eaten one and having her identities taken from her? In a way, she sees Theru perhaps as having her life taken from her story taken from her, and by the very, there's the mental trauma, but there's a very physical manifestation of her trauma as well. So let's talk for a bit on the relationship between Tenar and Theru. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? As it's really quite central to this story. But what do you think Le Guin was trying to show us with this relationship? And anybody
I'd say,
go ahead, Glenn.
I mean, it's probably one of the better mother-daughter stories. Mother-child, doesn't have to be daughter stories, but in this case it is. It's that role that in folklore, I think, is probably more commonly given to the woman, of the mother character when she's not a witch, cooking the children in an oven and everything. That's the other role in folklore you see. But the whole, the mother figure, it's considered to be one of the more important roles in storytelling you can have. I mean, a lot of religions are based on the mother goddess, excuse me. Sorry, hold on a second.
No problem. Take your time.
Here
we get some water.
Yeah, go ahead. Somebody take it from me for a second.
All right, yeah, let Glenn have a drink there. Any thoughts, Bill or Anita?
Yeah. After finishing the story, I'm looking back and I'm realizing how much Goha is basically the hero of Earthsea. Everything has been leading up to that moment of her having the empathy and the ability to understand what this child will have to go through from this point on. Her empathy with that is what makes her bring the child, into her, and her love and her unflinching love, irregardless of others' thoughts and everything, is just so powerful. And it's a beautiful, beautiful relationship. Does she always know what she's doing? No, she's trying to figure it out as she goes along, but she is always loving, very loving, and committed to providing a meaningful life for the child. And it's just gorgeous. I think it's kind of the mother everybody wishes they had. Somebody who would fight that hard for them to have a meaningful life. And I mean, honestly, times in this book, just I broke down. I lost my mother years ago, but just some of those reflections, back on some of the stuff, interactions with my mom, I could compare to this. And it was just, I love it. So, I mean, I think it's the mom we all wish we had.
Yeah, beautiful. Glenn, did you want to finish up, or should I let?
I'm done. I was good. Bill kind of wrapped up what I was going to say.
Beautiful. Okay. Anita, what do you think about Tenar and Theru?
Actually, Tenar is a very strong woman, and she's exactly who Teru needs, because people tend to blame survivors rather than perpetrators in these scenarios.
That's right.
Because they know that's wrong. They couldn't stop what's happening to that girl or what happened. They failed actually. So instead of blaming themselves, they tend to blame the survivors. So Teru here needs actually a safe environment, and Tenar is perfect for that, because she is strong. She can provide that safety. Here, Teru needs that safe environment and that space to heal herself. She doesn't need someone to push. Actually, in this, in even in real life, if something happens, some people actually tend to push those survivors, like get help, like move on. They tend to push, right? In that place, actually, Teru was so damaged, so broken. She needs the space to move on to heal in her own time, in her own pace. I think that's exactly what Tenor provided. Even we'll get to Antimas later, maybe, but that Antimas and Tenor, Teru, it's a complete package, actually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Nice
think
shout out to
another
Andrew
as-
Moss. Go ahead, Glenn.
I think another aspect that was important in helping Theru heal was to have a father who treated her like he was her father instead of being an abuser. Like, what was it, Handy, or was Handy the friend who was abusing her?
Handy
Or the friend
was
of the father.
the friend who
Yeah.
Of the father.
who
Okay.
yeah,
Uncle, I think.
yeah,
I can't remember if the dad was ever named. I don't
yeah.
Yeah.
remember.
They
Handy
kind
is uncle.
yeah. Well, he called himself it,
Okay.
but yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I think Theru didn't fully seem to fully start healing until Ged showed up. Well, showed back up after he came back down the mountain from the goat herding, and
Yeah.
started bonding with her. And that's, I mean, it's close there to the end where everything's going to have to start developing anyways, even more. But I do think that he played a part, played a large part, because there was only one other man she ever let touch her, and that was the king,
yeah.
Lebanon.
Yeah. Interestingly, though, too, I think that Theru probably played a part in Hawk or Sparrowhawk or Ged's healing as well. That
Definitely.
he needed to learn how to be a human in a way. He needed to learn how to relate to people on a human level. He had been this powerful mage and he had lost all of that at the end of the farthest shore, and he shows up on the back of Khalesin, and he has to be nurtured as well. In the same way that you were talking about Anita, you were talking about how Tenar nurtures Theru and gives her a space. She does the same thing for Ged, really.
Yes.
He needs some
Absolutely.
nurturing in space, and he goes out in the mountains with the goats and finally is able to realize, okay, I was being kind of an idiot there. And I think he is allowed. A lot of people read this book and they're upset by what happens with Ged, because here you have this powerful mage who saves the world, and what is his reward? He becomes powerless and frustrated, and but guess what? That's a metaphor for life, ladies and gentlemen. That's what happens to us. We get old and you lose your powers, and he has to find a human purpose for himself, right? A purpose outside of his power, something that is other than his power. And he connects for the first time, really, ever in his life, because he was somewhat of an orphan. I know his father was around, but he was a very absent father. And he connects with, first, I think, Tenar, and they become a couple, which is beautiful. He never would have had that experience if he hadn't lost his power. And with this beautiful little girl, who turns out to be much more than just a little girl, but we'll talk about that later. So thoughts on Ged, I guess. Why don't we talk about Ged for a bit? How did you guys feel? Were you at all like, gosh, I
liked it.
Disappointed? You liked it?
I liked it that he lost, and especially contextualizing in the way he describes, and even Auntie Moss describes it. Men are men because they have power. At least that's been said multiple times. And here he is finally losing all of that power and finding a new way to actually become a man for the first time. Whether it's by being bedded or just being a human being, that happens to have male parts. He's finally learned how to be more than he was restricted to being when he had magic, if that makes sense. Magic seemed to restrict him, in multiple ways. But yeah, I think he, unlike most of the other, well, not most, several of the other men in this story, he's not threatened by women.
No.
He still seemed a little uncomfortable with the idea of women having magic outside of being witches because of that whole debate. You know, he was like, she kings or she king, yeah, she kings is all a queen was. You know, I disagreed with him on that, but I don't know if that's got context given later books. If he sticks to that in the last story, I have to read on to find out. But
Yeah.
I did find that to be one of the more interesting discussions.
A good point, Glenn. And I think you get the extreme toxic form of that in the character Aspen. You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
he's the absolute, like, that's where this kind of thinking leads, is to people that kind of sickness, really. So, but what are your thoughts on Ged, Anita? Were you upset that he was turned into this sort of impotent feeling man who had to find another way to be in the world?
Not necessarily, because we have all Tenar here. I love Tenar in terms of Edwana, and I was very happy to see her as a major character in this book. Maybe if she wasn't a major character, maybe I would have been upset, but I am completely okay with it. At the same time, what Legwin did here with Ged, he was completely wrapped in his own power, and he 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 behaved like he lost his own identity, because that's what he identified with his power. So, and even after being with Tenor and being with Teru, he left them and went to the mountains as a goat herder. So he wasn't satisfied with this life. He had to he had to make his come to his own conclusion that he has to realize that okay, his life, that part is over, and that took him time, but I think I'm okay with that. Actually, Legwin said it very well in his afterword. She says in Tehanu he can become finally fully a man. He's no longer the servant of his power. That was actually beautifully said.
Yeah.
And she also talked about, here differences between men in power. She explored that gender differences where men identifies with power. Once it's very difficult for them to live with that shame, whereas women can, get used to living with that.
Yeah.
That
Yeah, that's a very interesting passage too. Yeah, great. Those are great specific examples. And, I read this as a younger man, and I have to confess, it's bothered me. I accepted what Le Guin decided to do with Ged, but it bothered me a little bit that here, my hero from the earlier books was this impotent guy who couldn't even defend himself when this mean bully, sorcerer guy, came on the scene. But now I'm reading it as a slightly older man. I actually not only accept that Le Guin decided to do this with this character, but I actually think it's beautiful. And I love actually what she's done in this story. How about you, Bill? What do you think about Ged in this story? Now we've seen him from a boy to taking him right into his old age here, and you've given him this relationship with Tenar, which, man, if he had noticed this a long time ago, you'd think he could have had a lot more time with her, maybe even, huh?
Yeah, that would have left out Lebanon, though. We wouldn't have, know. So, for me, there's two really main points with Ged. The first is, this is the ultimate loss of ego, because everything he was and was about is about his magic, and being a wizard. So when he loses that, he loses his self. And I think it goes into the dangers of placing what you do over who you are. That's why he's so morose, downtrodden, and he feels impotent. I mean, even if it's not a physical thing, spiritually, he feels that way. I think it's necessary. It's a natural reaction that somebody would have if they were in that situation and suddenly had everything taken away. So it makes sense for him to be the way he is. I don't understand people getting angry about it. How would you react if everything you were was taken away from you? Same way, right? I mean, or pretty close.
Sure.
So I don't understand the anger on that. The other thing I love is the role reversal, because we basically get Tombs of Athawon switched.
Yeah.
Ged is the one who needs to be taught what it means to be a free man as opposed to Tanar. And she's
That's
the
a
one
good
who has
point.
to sort of lead him there this time. And I think that's beautiful. That sort of switch, that duality, the way they overlap is just, it's well done. It's beautifully told. But I am completely okay because Ged's reaction is natural. You know, he does find his way eventually. And, you know, he admits he was mourning a life that is just done. You know, what am I mourning? I'm not that anymore. So that realization he had to come to was, you know, it's a beautiful moment, him telling about it. But yeah, his reaction when we first see him is completely understandable. And I do not understand why people are upset about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So yeah, I agree. It's beautiful what Le Guin decided to do with this character. Another thing that I found very intriguing about this fourth book is we learn a lot more about dragons and their relationship with
Yes.
humans. And there's a lot of foreshadowing because I had read it before and I knew to look for it this time, but there's a lot of foreshadowing with the song of that one woman that Ogian hears and
Woman of Kamei.
sees
the women.
sees her as a dragon initially and is like freaked out, you know. And then there's that song is what of course Theru keeps repeating as well, and there's a bit of foreshadowing going on there. And then there's the fan that is in the fellow's house who's named Fan, and you have the dual sides of this fan, dragons on one side, humans on the other, but when you hold it up to the light they merge with one another.
Right.
So, and then of course you have Theru / Tehanu herself, who it would seem is has got some draconian blood in her, if you will. So what do you guys think of that? What do you think of the dragon bits in here and the idea that, what do you make of the ending with Tehanu? What is she? What do you think? And who wants to go first on that?
There was quite a bit of foreshadowing. I mean, you know, the sparks when Tanar's combing her hair and she gets fascinated with the fire. She even says at one point, talking about the king, I want to fly and see him. Now, as far as I know, the only things that fly in Earthsea are dragons, birds, or wizards who can turn into birds.
Yeah.
So I found that you also fly there really good. She had a reaction when they mentioned Kalestin's name, a physical reaction. They could feel the heat coming off of her.
Yeah.
That was my first real clue that, okay, there's something more going on here. That reveal at the end was just perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely perfect. And I mean, you know, the moment she said, no, it's this way, I'm like, okay, whatever magic is affecting them is not affecting her.
Yeah.
Okay. And then she knew Auntie Moss's true name without ever having heard it. And I'm like, okay, it has to be dragon related.
It's her first language.
Yeah, it's her language.
Yeah.
I've read this book now like 3 or 4 times since we first started this project. And the last few times reading through, I kept, even though I'd seen stuff before, I would see new foreshadowing hinting at her being a dragon. And it's all over the place. It just, you can't hide from it, really. It's there. And I wonder if she would have progressed more, if that side of her would have come out if she hadn't been traumatized. I wonder if that's something Ursula Le Guin ever thought about. What would her life, would she have ever realized what she was if what had happened to her hadn't happened and she was raised by Tanar? You know, I have to wonder about that, specifically because it was fire that was punishing, you know, was used to punish her. It was specifically fire, which is so tied to dragons. I mean, almost every form of dragons, fire is their element.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. What about you, Anita? What do you make of the dragon lore in Tehanu and what Le Guin was trying to do there, and the reveal with Tehru being this seemingly daughter of Khalasin. I think daughter taken in a more broad way than just
Right.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to say I love that ending scene where Teru is the one who saved her parents. That was a nice touch, actually.
Yeah.
And this one, as Glenn said, I think it's more in terms of, metaphorically, she's the daughter of Khalesin because she was burned in fire, almost burned. I think it may be because of that, because I don't see her. I mean, she's born to her abusive father, and her mother was also a victim. So I don't know how it could be, like literal sense, how it could be that she's daughter of Khalesin. So I am thinking it's because of her being burned in the fire. It could be that.
Yeah.
Almost like a catalyst. Almost like
Yeah.
a catalyst that it triggered.
She might have
Yeah.
had innate magic that once that trauma was inflicted on her, sort of changed that magic.
Because
Yeah.
according to the lore, according to the story that we get, that I think it's Tanar who repeats the story to Theru, we are all dragon relatives, right? In this world, in Earthsea. We split apart at some point deep in the past, and dragons went their way and humans went our way, but we still are connected. And they keep the true speech, the ancient speech, and those of us who can use it, who have the power to use it, can be mages, etc. But there is that connection, and maybe Anita, you're right. Maybe that the trauma that she undergoes is a kind of catalyst that brings out her ancient kinship with dragons, so that she wouldn't have been Tehanu without that incident. It's hard to say though for sure. I would have loved to ask Le Guin that question. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that she's the bridge. She's a bridge now, is how it feels. She's the bridge between us and the dragons. And just the concept of her becoming that bridge sort of brightens my heart a little bit and softens a little bit of the anger and just despair I feel for what was done to her. So just that lightness gets to, enter that darkness, that little spark, makes it all the more better. For me,
This right here.
Yeah.
the huge
Yeah.
reveal for me, the huge reveal for me was that Khalesin is Segoy.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That blew my, I mean, in my notes, I mean, I have it right here. Holy expletive. Khalesin is Segoy. I mean, that blew my mind. Absolutely
go back
blew
and
my
look.
mind. Yeah, I texted Glenn. I'm like, oh my God, did you read that?
I was like, I did not catch that. I went back and looked for the two words together, and I'm like, oh, how did I miss that? In the same sentence, the way she does it. But like that's what I was reading when Philip joined us earlier. The line is she's Thero's reciting the poem or whatever it's called, and it's among all beings ever returning, the eldest, the doorkeeper, Segoy, and it's what she's referring to Khalesin as. Now, I did a little bit of Googling just to find out, because after you brought that up, I'm like, is Khalesin Segoy? And a lot of people are like, yeah, it's probably the case. But then I looked up, because the way doorkeeper's there in that sentence, I looked up doorkeeper. Apparently, we do find out who the first doorkeeper is, master doorkeeper, in one of the short stories from Tales of Earthsea. So I don't know how close I am to the idea of Segoy / Khalesin being part of that. I haven't read that story yet, but I don't know. I definitely was totally surprised when you pointed out the Segoy Khalesin relationship.
Yeah.
Though.
Segoy being the ancient mythical creator of Earthsea. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he basically created the archipelago.
Yeah.
And I mean, that blew my mind. I had to read it. I went back and read it like 3 or 4 times. I'm like, because she's saying to him, I did not know what else to do, Segoy. And he said, "You did right, child." And I'm like, okay, so he answered. Okay, so it's not just her perception that he's Sugoi. I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, that blew my mind. And it kind of changes how I look at every interaction we've had with dragons beforehand. And I mean, it completely changes it. And I'm like, oh man, I got to go back and read Earthsea now and, Wizard of Earthsea and just start all over. Knowing what I
Yeah.
know now, it's going to change things a little bit for me.
Yeah.
I mean, with that last paragraph, she made me want to both go back and read from the beginning at the same time, read what comes next, the other wing, because she gave that foreshadowing for us. Telesin asks Teru to join her, and Teru wants to stay back with her parents.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really wonderful stuff. Another thing that sticks out to me from Tehanu is the sheer beauty of some of these moments. And I was so happy for Tenar and Ged and the love they found and some of the idyllic moments that they had together, like when they were back on the way back to, because I'd read it before, I knew what was going to happen and I was kind of dreading it, but on their way they had that moment in that sort of glade, in the forest where Ged had this spot. He said, let's stay over here, I know this spot. And it was just so beautiful, and they had this time together which nothing can sully, right? And so I enjoyed. I was so happy for these characters to have that, and I felt like they deserved it. And I could sense also Theru growing and coming into her own as well, and she's able to make this journey twice as fast as before, and she's healing physically, but even more importantly, spiritually and mentally. She's really coming into her own. I think that's what grabs me at the end when she's the one that saves the day. You have this traumatized, damaged, little vulnerable person who has been treated like some kind of, like it's her fault, right? Like blame the victim here. And
Spark.
it's been, yeah, like Spark, his reaction is just so typical of a in that patriarchal world, where he's like, what did she do? Like, he, in his mind, she had to have done something horrible to deserve that. It's like some kind of karmic punishment or something. So I just could not help but almost cry with joy as this little vulnerable person comes into her own power and beauty. And I love how Tanar sees that beauty the whole time, and continuously, even though she at times feels powerless in the face of the cruelty of the world, she always keeps up her love for this child. And there's just something so overwhelmingly wonderful about that, I think. So what are any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in the afterword, Le Guin makes a quote, what cannot be mended must be transcended. And that just really spoke to me. I have it written down, and that is something I think I will be holding on to probably for the rest of my life. That, there are things that happen that just can't be fixed, but you can grow from them, move beyond them. I love that thought, and that's what we see happen is she begins to move on. The other thing is the beauty of Tanar actually showing Ged the simple life of love, work, family, duty to those is a magic of its own that has nothing to do with wizardry, but is just as fulfilling. And I love that message.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Yeah.
I like the fact Ged's willing to do dishes too.
Yes.
As somebody, as somebody who's who was trained in the domestic arts at a young age by my mom, I've done housework, my whole life. I've never understood the concept of women's work and men's work being put that way. And unfortunately, there are just too many people who do insist on a separation of chores by gender lines. And seeing Ged doing dishes even after Spark has said, I'm not going to do that. it was an example of Ged showing, he's got real masculinity there, that he's not afraid to do something others would deem as being women's work.
Yeah.
Because only people afraid to do women's work are men who are not confident in themselves. At least
Right.
the way I see it.
I agree. I'm the primary dishwasher in our household.
Yeah, me too. So don't worry about it. My wife has me trained well.
Yeah. Once in a while they get inspected and I'm told, where I need to improve, but I'm still the primary dishwasher. So.
And the sad part is it's probably the kids who inspect them and tell them where he messed up.
No.
Dad. No,
Not the
they don't go,
kids, no.
Dad.
Yeah. So great. Any other thoughts on Tehanu from any of you? Anything we missed? There are certain characters we haven't talked a lot about, like Lebanon, the king. What did you think of his new role? He doesn't have a big role in Tehanu, but it's a beautiful part that he plays here, though. I love the way
He's a healer.
Yeah.
And I had questions about that, about him removing the mark that Handy had left on Tehanu. I'm like, how did he do that? How did that work? Is there
King is
something
healer, as
there?
Glenn said. King is healer. Yeah, like
Yeah.
Aragorn in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Yes,
I
no,
definitely.
There's a magic to it, I think, in the way it's presented, but it's also the idea of he is there to heal the land, right? Because the archipelago had gone through a period where magic is waning and people are being cruel, and what's the background here is that it's felt that we need some, benevolent monarch to bring the healing. That's the king's primary role, in fact, and so that is what he is able to play this role. It's a bit of a sacrificial role too, in a sense, right? He is a kind of sacrifice in a way, by being this king who plays this role, but he does it in so many respects. He does it in a very literal way by removing that mark from Tehanu, but he also does it by asserting order and bringing about peace and prosperity and insisting that no, you can't rob people anymore, and bringing the pirates to heel and all of that. So he's I loved his relationship with Tenar as well, and I was a little sad that he didn't get to have Ged show up, but he shows wisdom and understanding and saying, okay, fine, if he's invited, but if it's not right for him to come, then it's okay.
It just shows how much he learned in the farthest shore, because he started out not ready to do that. He was far from being that way. There's a lot of growth in that book. There was one line really early that it's a sad, painful line to read. It stood out to me the entire time. The child stared at her or at nothing, trying to breathe and trying again to breathe and trying again to breathe. I lost it the first time I read that. I mean, it was just to the point where the next page, I was surprised that the child was still there. I really thought that was, I had no idea that Thera was going to, make it past that scene. I thought she was just like for that opening bit. And then pleasantly surprised to see a year later, she's still okay. She's alive and doing well. But
there are many great. Sorry, I thought you finished. Go ahead. There are many great quotes actually that are there. I noted down so many, but two that were very important to me was when Handy came back and put his hand on Teru. Then she was re-triggered actually. That all healing all gone, and she was re-traumatized. Then Tenar was like, from past 1 year, I tried to heal her, and with one touch, he took that away. That was actually how triggering happens. That was a good indicator. And in later part, when Ged comes back and she started healing again, then Tenar actually gives her a new dress, and she tells Teru that there are so many scars. People see those scars, but you are not uh, responsible for that. You are beautiful. People see that too. That she created that trust. I mean, those two made so much impact on me. I think I'm going to read this book many, many times.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautifully said. Yeah, there's a lot in here too about the difference between wanting to dominate the world around you and acceptance of the world and being part of the world. The characters who try to defeat death again. Aspen, it turns out, was a disciple of Cobb, who was the villain in The Farthest Shore, and he wants to continue this project of defeating death, and thinks he's done it by keeping this poor old man alive by robbing. He's not really prolonging life. He's so much as stealing life from one place and putting it in another, right?
The grandson, yeah, draining him.
Yeah. But I have to admit, I'm not exactly proud of this, but I was sort of satisfied at Aspen's fate at the end. It seems 100%. Like he gets roasted, but then that also Kalesin just sat on, him and the others. So that's an end to them, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'm all right with that.
That last chapter, how they treated, we get that in Tena's perspective. They tie Tena, actually, they start treating her. That was, oh my God, terrifying chapter.
They make her an animal.
Yeah.
Crawl
horrifying.
Up the stairs. Ugh.
Yeah.
After that is a justice, actually. I mean, I am very happy, and I'm not that nice as you, Philip. I don't even regret. I'm happy that happened to them.
It's karma.
I'm not complaining.
It's very karma.
Yeah.
This is my favorite dragon currently, just because of what he did.
Yeah, that's one heck of an ending. But it's that, as I said earlier, particularly men, because men are socialized to believe that to be real men, they have to be powerful. And this is by putting Tenar in the position of a dog or an animal or whatever, and treating her that way, and making Ged also be the one to do it to her. He enjoys in a very disgusting, sadistic way. He enjoys making Ged do that to her by leading her on this leash. He's asserting his power over them, and that's makes him feel like a man, I guess. But really, what he's doing is he's throwing away his humanity in the process. So it was beautiful to see love triumph there at the end with because of Theru's heroics as well.
Definitely.
All right. Well, any other final thoughts? I think we've done a pretty good job discussing this. I
don't have any other notes that I need to bring up.
Okay. All right.
No, so I mean, I think we covered it all, and I think we can all say this is a beautifully written, beautiful story.
Yeah.
And, it will touch you if you give it a shot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any final words, Anita?
I mean, she did everything under 300 pages. I have it. I mean, right now I'm reading. Sorry to dunk on Wheel of Time, but this is a 900-page book.
Been there.
What Guin did, she explored everything under 300 pages. That was, there are many places. Her prose is very difficult for me as a non-native speaker, non-English speaker. I have to reread many paragraphs to understand her meaning, but I did not mind the effort. I don't mind rereading that. She managed to, tell us so much about the characters, about the world, what these Aspen and those guys are doing in just few sentences. That was, I mean, not many people can do that.
That's talent. Yeah.
100%.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank all three of you. I really enjoyed this discussion, and you brought up some wonderful things that have increased my love of the story even more. So thank you to all three of you, Bill and Glenn and Anita. And
Thank you for
also-
having us.
Oh,
Yeah,
my
Thank
thank
you.
pleasure.
for having me.
My pleasure. This is wonderful. This is the best thing about BookTube by far. For me, are these discussions. They're so enriching. And so also thank you to everybody watching, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on Tehanu, and just what your thoughts on Le Guin's writing in general as well, because to me, she is one of my most important writers that I've ever encountered, and she points the way to, I think, how to do a lot of things really, really well, and maybe in some ways not currently in fashion because of the way the genre has changed, the way our expectations from stories. But to me, there's something timeless about the way she tells these stories. And I'm sure that once you get accustomed to this particular manner of storytelling, it will become as beautiful to you as it is to obviously the four of us. So,
And I'm assuming her science fiction's just as good as the Earthsea books. I haven't read anything other than this of hers.
yeah, I
So,
haven't either. I haven't
I am-
delved into her science fiction. So, yeah.
I'm very interested in reading it.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. And until next time.